Hey, and welcome to the 5-Minute Podcast Review for Friday, January 13, 2017. So, first podcast qualifies as the most niche podcast I've covered so far. It's called The Pen Addict. That's right, a podcast about pens. Everything and anything about pens. Here's just a small sample.
There's a difference between tip size and line width, which a lot of people get confused. So the tip size is what you see on the pen, printed on the pen, 0.5 millimeters, 0.7 millimeters. When you write on the page, the line width is different, and that's not measured by the pen companies, right? They're not going to say, or most of them don't say this is a 0.5 millimeter pen and the line width is going to be 0.4 millimeters on the page. So line width and tip size are two different things.
No, I didn't know that. It was like I had just assumed, I just assumed that it would be the same.
Right. That's why if you put down, if you grab, 5 different pens off your desk that are all 0.5 millimeters, you'll see they'll have different line widths. You'll notice that the line width isn't consistent, and that's going to be, just differences in the manufacturer, how they've designed the tip of that pen to lay the ink down on the page.
So it's, even though it is that size, depending on the way that it's designed, will give a different thickness.
Not only that, but it depends on the ink too.
Right, okay. So you could put different inks into the same...
So I said that was just a small sample, and I wasn't kidding. The Pen Addict podcast started back in 2012, and since then they've pumped out a whopping 237 episodes, with most episodes running at least an hour, often longer. They've got thousands of listeners around the world, and when they do occasional live shows, it's to standing room only audiences. Now, I'm probably not going to be listening to these hundreds of episodes of The Pen Addict, but I love that it exists because it's a near perfect example of what podcasts are perfect for. That is, broadcasting to a super niche audience. So I want to throw down a challenge. If you know of a podcast that is more niche than The Pen Addict, let me know, and I'll cover it in a future episode. The email address should be on your screen. So please help me find the most niche podcast out there. Okay, podcast number 2 is The Art of Manliness. The podcast creator and host Brett McKay describes The Art of Manliness as a podcast that aims to help men become better men. And scrolling down the list of episodes, you'll see subjects like the secrets of a perfect shave, survival skills from a Navy SEAL. In fact, there's a lot of Navy SEAL episodes. Easy ways to upgrade your style, the making of Winston Churchill, the code of chivalry, and one of the latest episodes on the laws of self-defense. I've just listened to this episode actually, and it was pretty interesting to hear how using self-defense as a legal defense works, or often doesn't work. It's complicated, but really well explained and a good episode to listen to. So I've put a link to this specific episode on your screen along with the main podcast link. Overall, there's a bit of an old-fashioned conservative vibe to The Art of Manliness, and this is reinforced by Brett McKay, the host, saying he's inspired by the kind of man his grandfather was. So, despite the slightly comic strip-sounding name, The Art of Manliness actually takes itself quite seriously. Well, brace yourself to avoid whiplash as we go from The Art of Manliness to podcast number 3, which is Call Your Girlfriend. So the concept here is about listening in on a weekly call between two 20-something-year-old girlfriends, Amanito Sao and Anne Friedman. These BFFs who live on different sides of the US call each other once a week or so to talk about, quote, the intricacies of pop culture and the latest in politics, and to real talk each other about everything from menstrual cycles to workplace dramas, end quote. On most alternate weeks, they also dial in various other, quote, girlfriends and go in-depth on a particular topic. And girlfriends here include such big names as people like Melinda Gates. The podcast describes itself as unapologetically feminist, and it definitely has a smart, hip, contemporary liberal vibe. So while you could troll the back episodes, because there are definitely some good back episodes to troll, many of them, though, are fairly of the moment and so have a short shelf life. It's really the kind of podcast where the best episode is usually the latest episode. On to podcast number 4, Grammar Girl. This podcast has managed to survive on my playlist for quite a few years now, mainly because it's not too long, around 10 to 15 minutes an episode, and I often learn something from it. Each episode of Grammar Girl, hosted by Mignon Fogarty, aka The Grammar Girl, deals with a few simple tips around the English language and grammar. Things like when to use among versus amongst, or Is pair as in a pair of shoes a singular or plural word? Or the difference between hung and hanged, and many, many more. It's a good podcast to subscribe to, especially if you do a bit of writing or public speaking, or even just to polish up your grammar and vocabulary. A nice feature is that the host often provides a mnemonic, or what she calls a quick and dirty tip, to help you remember a particular rule or maybe a tricky spelling. Last podcast this week is Beautiful Anonymous, hosted by comedian Chris Gethard. So let's just have a listen to Chris explaining the concept in his own words.
Every week, I open the phone line to one anonymous caller, and I can't hang up first no matter what. It's a show where I want to hear stories. You can call in, anybody in the world, call in, talk to me, just don't tell me who you are. You can have up to an hour of my time. When we record it, we have a real, honest interaction, because I don't think there's enough of those in my life, at least, and I bet other people feel that way.
So yeah, that's pretty much the concept. Each episode, a random person calls in and basically spills their guts under the cloak of anonymity for up to an hour. I understand that a tweet goes out with a number to call, and the first person to call in becomes the anonymous guest for that episode. So far, personally, I've found the episodes can be a bit hit or miss, but maybe that's just me. That said, it's an interesting and original concept, so worth checking out. It could be right up your alley, as it is for many, many thousands of listeners, and particularly fans of Chris Gethard. Well, that's it. 5 podcasts in around 5 minutes. All links are on your screen. You might have to look around for them depending on what app you're using to listen, but they shouldn't be hard to find. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and if you do, or if you already have, I'll drop another episode with another 5 podcasts into your device next week. Thanks for listening.